No chronicle ever began with the truth of Molech's soil. That knowledge lies buried too deep beneath sediment and siege. Yet there are traces, etched into the blackened bedrock by night treads, ghost-cast in data embers sealed within half-dead cogitators, remembered not by historians, but by the throne's mechanicum themselves. If Molech speaks, it does so in the dreaming breath of iron colossi, long since stilled. It remembers everything. The world that would one day burn in the crucible of heresy was once a haven of strange promise. Situated within a system whose sun bore twin halos, Molech had once mirrored Terra, its tectonic rhythms, its gravity, even the genetic viability of its flora and fauna. But beauty was not what drew humanity to it in the dark age of technology. It was survival, and survival on Molech was never earned by peace. Before civilization took root, the world was violent in the way only untamed biomes can be. The native life forms were not passive, their predation was systemic, brutal, and cunning. Great scythe beasts prowled the plains, shield-scaled insects of vast proportion devoured harvests from beneath, and the skies bled with flocks of bone crows, whose wings carried toxins bred to dissolve armor. To endure Molech was to rise in armor, or die beneath talon and fang. And so the colonists turned to a salvation as ancient as any psalm, the standard template constructs. From hidden vaults, they summoned walkers, suits vast enough to rival giants, powerful enough to crush herds beneath each thunderous step. But these were no lumbering automatons. They were extensions of the human will, bridged to mind and blood through the throne mechanicum. Those first knights were not warriors. They were farmers and protectors, craftsmen and rangers. But the thrones did something to them. No one can say when or how. Over generations, those who piloted the knight suits began to change. Not in form, but in spirit. Ritual replaced maintenance. Reverence replaced command. They named themselves nobles and founded houses not by decree, but by bloodline and the right of martial inheritance. The world reshaped itself in their image. Feudal domains rose, carved from blasted coastlines and ancient mountain ranges, each centered around fortified bastions known as sanctuaries. There, the thrones were kept in vaults of iron and song, guarded by sacristan cults, trained in the art of war ritual and machine prayer. With each new heir, the rite of becoming was undertaken, an ordeal that left some dead, some mad, and some transfigured into something more than human. Thus was the old truth buried, that the knights had not been born to rule, but made so by their union with machine ghosts. Thrones whispered to their riders, and in time, the voices began to teach. House Divine, among the eldest of these lineages, traced its ancestry to the first pilot, Varen Divine, a name passed down like a sword. Their banners bore a serpent encircling a solar crown, its fangs ever poised toward the heart of an eclipse. Though many other houses would come to swear fealty to Terra or to Mars in later ages, House Divine remained untouched, sovereign, and secretive. Their dominion was not just military, it was religious. For beneath their thronehold, in caverns sealed by glyph stone older than human memory, lay something more than architecture. They called it the Coil. Others later would call it a gate. Even before the coming of the Emperor, House Divine had begun to shape Molech in its own image. Other houses paid tribute. Their knights bore the mark of the serpent. And among the priestesses who walked between thrones and shrine, the title adoratrice began to eclipse all others. Some whispered of visions, others of communion. And in the vaults beneath the sanctums, where no serf dared tread, sacrifices were made to something vast and unseen. But the stars turned, as they always do. And one day, in a century long since uncounted, a vessel fell toward Molech, not from the void, but from silence. It bore no heraldry. It answered no hails. Its arrival was witnessed only by the few who were meant to see it. From that ship came a figure who bore no name that mortals would remember. He was not crowned. He needed no crown. And with him came others, perpetuals, wanderers, beings who had outlived empires. Among them was Alivia, who would outlast the heresy itself. They did not come to conquer. they came to enter. For Molech held more than thrones and beasts. It held a doorway into madness and godhood alike. And the one who would become the master of mankind was here to walk through. The great houses of Molech did not simply endure the age of strife. They fossilized. Across the long millennia of isolation, each became a citadel of memory, encasing its traditions like insects in amber, preserved, ossified, revered beyond reason. Among them, House Divine reigned supreme, not merely by force of arms, but by the quiet suffocation of culture. To rule Molech was to rule its soul, and Divine, in time, came to believe they possessed the authority to define what that soul was. They did not speak of conquest. They spoke of inheritance. And the sigil they bore, a serpent wreathed about a crowned star, was no idle emblem. It was their god. This deity had no singular name, though fragments recovered from sacristan codices and ritual ledgers refer to it as the Coiled One, the god within, the sibilant flame. To the common serf, it was a myth, invoked in old chants to ward away the fog beasts and plague winds. But within the sanctified crypts of House Divine's palace vaults, beneath obsidian domes etched in blood and gold, the god was neither symbol nor superstition. It was presence. The adoratress, high priestess of the inner cult, was both oracle and enforcer. She alone communed with the coil. She alone descended into the cavern's depth, where the air turned viscous with unreality, and time shuddered like a wounded beast. Her rituals were not metaphors. They were acts of interface, meditations that stitched thought into the warp veils beneath Molech's crust. Each gesture, each litany, bent toward a single aim: revelation through descent. Sabella Divine was such a figure. Adoratrix Dracina, she was called, a title that bore the connotation of both dragon and priestess, flame and womb. She moved among the thrones as both a war sister and a seer, her presence marked by robes of black-threaded crimson embroidered with Ouroboros sigils whose patterns were forbidden to replicate. Her voice, it was said, could still even the iron heart of a knight's core. And in her wake there followed silence, or death. But she was not alone in her purpose. Beneath the sanctums of House Divine, beneath the crystalline reliquaries and sacristan halls where the warplate was anointed with oils and ash, something slumbered. A structure, a presence, a gate. They called it many things: the coil, the abyssal mouth, the serpent's spire. Even among the faithful, none truly knew what it was, only that it exhaled the impossible, and those who stood too long in its breath were never whole again. The throne's mechanicum of House Divine began to reflect this. Their ancestral imprints warped subtly. Voice patterns shifted in their mnemonic echoes. Dreams bled into waking thought. Some pilots saw visions not of ancestral battles, but of burning angels and spiral thrones. Others recorded moments of apparent bilocation, dreaming in the cockpit of one night while witnessing events unfolding in another, hundreds of kilometers away. Yet none of this was seen as warning. It was venerated. The rituals grew darker, the sermons grew longer, the sacrifices moved from symbolic to literal, serfs went missing. Choirs sang in frequencies that seared flesh. The adoratrix's rites began to require blood. Even the machine priests of the Mechanicum, when they came in later centuries, found Molech difficult. The forge colonies established on its polar shelves were kept distant from the seat of House Divine. The cult of the Omnissiah was permitted, but its rituals were not to interfere with those of the house. Mars could supply armaments, could maintain the sacristan orders, but it could not command the faith of Molech's ruling line, because on Molech, the serpent was God, and the knights were its saints. At the zenith of their power, House Divine was more than a military engine. It was a theocracy built within the bones of a war machine. Its scions rode to battle with relics stained in sacrificial oils, their banners whispering litanies in hex-coded tongues. Victories were not celebrated, they were tithed to the coil. And the knight suits themselves became shrines. Each wound suffered in battle was hallowed, each battlefield turned into a reliquary. Yet the power that fed them was never theirs. The gate had been silent for long ages. It waited, as such things do. And then, without herald or proclamation, the Emperor came. No banners preceded him, no fleet darkened the skies. Only a single ship, black as entropy, falling like a dead star into Molech's upper atmosphere. It did not burn. It landed in the serpent's breath. And with him came those who could not die. The silence of the coil was about to end. The moment passed without thunder. No triumphal entry, no angelic host. Just a soundless descent, observed only by those chosen to witness. A vessel not of Martian manufacture, nor of Terran lineage, bled through the void like a shadow turned solid. Its hull bore no insignia. Its wake left no scorch upon the sky. It arrived not as an emissary of the Imperium, but as a fragment of something older. The Emperor of Mankind stepped onto Molech's surface not in conquest, but in intention. His presence did not trigger alarms in the planetary defense networks. The night houses did not rally. The sky did not darken beneath his name. For in this moment, he did not come as sovereign or master. He came as seeker. With him came a chosen few. Their names are not sung in the processional hymns of the ecclesiarchy. They were not numbered among the Legiones Astartes, nor listed in the ledgers of Terran archives. But they were known to the throne, those rare figures called perpetuals, scattered fragments of an ancient design, scattered across the ages. Among them, Alivia Sureka. Sureka was no warrior, though war would follow her for the rest of her days. She was a harbour pilot from Larsa, remembered only in fragmented logs and half-sent dreams. But the Emperor chose her to remain when he departed, and that choice alone carved her name into the bones of Molech. Their purpose was singular: the gate. Beneath the crust of Molech, far below the sanctum crypts of House Divine, deeper even than the sub-cavern vaults where the throne's mechanicum were anointed in sacred oil and ancient data, there existed something forgotten even by the war psalms. A fissure in real space. A wound into the realm of chaos. Not a portal created by ritual or warp accident, but something older, perhaps primordial. A natural gate. It did not seethe. It did not scream. It whispered. The Emperor entered, not metaphorically, not spiritually, physically, flesh and mind, will and soul. He crossed the veil, and Molech stood still. None know what he offered. No data slate records the nature of the exchange. No scripture dares define it. But when he emerged, something fundamental had changed. Those closest to him did not speak of it. Not then, not ever. But across the warp, in places that did not yet bear names, the dark gods turned their gaze toward him and smiled. Many have speculated on what passed within the Immaterium during that crossing. Some claim he bargained directly, a negotiation forged in metaphysical law and sacrificial equivalence. Others whisper he bent the warp through sheer will, reshaping its tides and stealing its secrets. A few, the mad or the sanctified, believe he allowed himself to be marked, not possessed, but touched, that he might create beings capable of resisting possession. Whatever transpired, the outcome was clear. He emerged with knowledge. Knowledge not merely of power, but of design. The genetic architectures, the soul-bonding mechanisms, the warp-scattered lattice work that would become the Primarch project. Molech was the forge, the gate, its crucible, the Emperor, its artificer. And then he left. He did not remain to receive homage. He did not summon the houses. He departed with the same silence with which he arrived, the secrets of the gate sealed once more behind cyclopean stone and buried beneath layers of memory suppression. Even the night houses, who had once bowed before him, remembered only a visit of minor import. Their minds had been touched, gently, precisely, scrubbed of context, but not obedience. All save one remained behind, Alivia Sureka. The Emperor tasked her with a burden no mortal should bear. She was to guard the gate, to endure the passage of centuries, unknown and uncelebrated. No army was left to her, No fortress rose around the breach, only her presence, encoded in sub-threshold chronorhythms and psychosonic locks, held back what lay beneath. She stood watch through storms, wars, and the slow decay of remembrance. She watched as House Divine's faith mutated into something unholy. She watched as Molech forgot what slept beneath it. And she waited. Because he had told her, one day another would come, and the gate would open once more. When the Great Crusade reached Molech, it did so not as a sudden sword thrust, but as the long, inexorable arm of unity. The fleets came like a slow storm, a formation of purpose, not wrath. Terror had not forgotten Molech. The Emperor remembered precisely what it was, and what he had once taken from it. Yet those who followed him now, his sons, his legions, knew nothing of the truth. To them, Molech was just another world, one among thousands, a holdout of half-regressed civilization, a prize to be brought into compliance. 4 legions descended, the Lunar Wolves, the Emperor's Children, the Dark Angels, and the White Scars, each under the command of its gene-sire, Horus, Fulgrim, Lionel Johnson, Jagatai Khan. Their names would one day be spoken with fire on the tongue, but then, in those years of conquest, they bore only glory. They came not to raise, but to elevate, to enforce the imperial truth, to strip away the superstitions of pre-compliance cultures, and to replace them with the clean architecture of reason. Molech resisted, not militarily. The night houses could not stand against the full fury of 4 Primarchs, but spiritually, culturally, ritually, they clung to their old ways, especially House Divine. Their serpent god was no metaphor. Their rituals were not traditions, they were sacraments. They had forgotten much, but not enough to welcome dismemberment with smiles. What followed was not battle, it was dismantling. The legions moved with precision. Fulgrim's warriors destroyed the sanctified amphitheatres of the Adoratrix. The Lunar Wolves stormed the cathedrals hidden beneath Lupercalia, those same cathedrals named in honour of Horus himself. The Dark Angels unearthed ossuary vaults, layered with bone-engraved litanies to the Coil. The White Scars hunted the last faithful through the mountain passes, silent and merciless. The Emperor walked among them. He issued no declarations. He made no public appearances. He simply moved through the cities, the temples, the vaults. And wherever he passed, memory was unravelled. The people forgot, not just names, but meanings. Symbols were stripped of power. The rites of the serpent became empty movements, half-remembered dances once sacred, now ridiculous. Even the throne's mechanicum, long haunted by their ghost echoes, grew quiet. The Coil fell into myth. The gate was sealed beneath the reconstructed foundation of a new city, Lupercalia, built in honour of Horus, a beautiful lie atop an ancient scar. None of the Primarchs recalled why the world had been important. Their memories had been touched. Each of them had knelt beside their father on Molech's soil. Each had fought in the name of truth and unity, and each had had those memories delicately removed. They remembered only the conquest, not the undercurrent. The gate's existence was buried in silence, sealed not with iron, but with obedience. The Adoratrix line was extinguished. House Divine was reshaped into a paragon of compliance. Their heraldry was purified, their rites rewritten, their thrones re-sanctified under mechanicum oversight. But beneath the crust of Molech, the gate remained, guarded not by legions, but by absence. To the wider Imperium, Molech became a footnote, a world of knights now loyal, an example of successful compliance, and a garrison post of minor strategic value. But those who served in the campaign whispered differently. Some spoke of strange dreams that lingered long after they left the surface. Others reported their knights humming with static prayers in long-dead dialects. One Mechanicus tech seer documented a data bleed from a throne core that recited a chant older than Old Night, then purged the record with his own hand. And still she remained. Alivia Sureka, cloaked in anonymity, moving through the sanctums as a medic, a technician, a serf. She tended the gate not with weapons, but with presence. Her gaze alone repelled the curious. She held the watch as the Imperium turned its gaze elsewhere, and the world resumed its rhythm. The serpent had been beheaded, but its coil still curled in the deep. And far above, on the bridge of a flagship unburdened by memory, Horus Lupercal felt a flicker of something lost. He could not name it, but it waited. The heresy was not a lightning bolt. It did not erupt in flame. It uncoiled, slow, serpentine, inevitable. And when it reached Molech, the world did not cry out. It remembered. It began with the dream. Horus, no longer the beloved son, but the War Master crowned in ash, looked upon the stars as if they owed him penance. His thoughts were fractured then, fragmented by the wound inflicted upon him on Davin, poisoned by Erebus, twisted by the gods who had waited so long for a vessel. Yet through the maelstrom of his ascension, a fragment emerged, a sliver of a past, erased. Molech. The name pulsed within him like a heartbeat from the past. He could not say why it mattered. The memory had been severed with surgical grace by the Emperor's own hand. But the warp remembers what flesh forgets. And the thing Horus had become was no longer bound by the barriers of mind alone. He remembered not events, but importance. Molech was a key. The decision was made. A massive invasion force was assembled, not to conquer, but to reclaim. Not to liberate, but to uncover. When the sons of Horus returned to Molech, they did so not as heroes, but as executioners. The Death Guard followed in their wake, grim and relentless, carrying the rot of inevitability. Their fleets darkened the atmosphere, and the shields of Molech's orbital defenses flickered and died. House Divine, now a compliant instrument of imperial will, stood ready to resist. Their knights deployed in formation, the banners of the throne world flying high. But banners cannot hold against rot and betrayal. The serpent woke again. It began within the war halls, whispers, blood rituals resurrected in secret. The coil of memory tightening like a garrote around reason. The descendants of those who had once called the adoratress their queen found themselves speaking in forgotten tongues. Their thrones, quiet for generations, began to murmur again. Sabella Divine had died long ago, but her rights had not. The current seneschal, Cyprian Divine, had once been a warrior of impeccable discipline, a paragon of post-compliance imperial fealty. But his dreams began to change. In them, the coil returned. In them, the gate sang. When Horus made contact, he did not offer alliance. He offered clarity. A memory returned, and House Divine turned. The betrayal was not slow. It was immediate and total. Knights that had fought alongside loyalist titans turned their weapons inward. Sacristans lit censers filled with warp dust. The battlefield became a theatre of demon-lit carnage. What had been knights became something else. War engines possessed, their thrones no longer bound to memory and honor, but to lust and hunger. In the capital of Lupercalia, the city built over the gate itself, the soil cracked open. Not metaphorically, physically. The sealed vaults beneath the city burst with seismic force, revealing the ancient stonework of the coil. The gate was open. The defenders were overwhelmed. Imperial Guard units were annihilated. Mechanicus enclaves were overrun. The remaining loyalist houses fought to the last night, but they were few. Too few. Of Molech's millions, only a few hundred would escape. Among them, not all were innocent. A fragment of the loyalist resistance, those few who had resisted the turn, those who had refused the serpent's call, carried with them a single aim: to warn terror. Because they understood now what Horus had come to take. The gate was not just a memory, it was a path, and the War Master was walking it. When Horus Lupercal stood before the gate at the heart of Molech, the world held its breath. Lupercalia lay in ruins above him, its white stone plazas cracked with scorched iron, its monuments to imperial truth smeared with heretical glyphs and trailing incense of sacrificial blood. The air shimmered with unreality. The gates had not been destroyed in the invasion. They had been unveiled. The War Master descended into the Coil not as a conqueror seeking plunder, but as an heir returning to the cradle of his apotheosis. It was never about war. He sought what the Emperor had taken. He remembered now, partially, painfully, like a scar pulled open. Not in facts, but in sensation. A memory of absence, of standing before something vast and formless, of his father kneeling, of voices not yet born. And so he passed through. The inner sanctum beneath Molech was no vault of stone and steel. It was a wound in reality. The gate was not a construct. It was a metaphysical lesion, pulsing with the breath of the immaterium. Its borders shimmered like oil on black water, fringed by cyclopean runes etched in bone dust and paradox. Horus entered, alone. What transpired within cannot be rendered with precision. The warp does not allow chronology. It denies witness. But what emerged was no longer merely the War Master, no longer only the brightest of the Primarchs, the bearer of the Lunar Wolf's legacy, the son who had been favoured. He came forth as something exalted. The gods had waited for this moment. Not in patience, but in design. The Emperor had stolen from them the template of demigodhood, crafted his Primarchs with stolen fire. Now Horus, the fallen son, came not to steal, but to accept. What the Emperor had bargained for in defiance, Horus claimed in allegiance. His soul was unmade and remade in the same heartbeat. He emerged from the gate armoured in belief, not imperial dogma nor the blind faith of mortals. He bore conviction born of divine affirmation. The four powers of the warp had touched him in unity. Khorne's fury, Tzeentch's foresight, Nurgle's rot, and Slanesh's temptation, each marked him, yet none claimed him completely. He was anointed. This was no pact. This was coronation. Those who beheld him could no longer meet his eyes. Even the Death Guard, hardened by ruin and despair, turned away in silence. The Knights of Divine fell to their knees as their thrones screamed in joy and agony. Their mechanical hearts beat to a rhythm of demonic pulse. The Justaerin saw him and wept, and the gate sealed once more. Not through mechanism, nor by command. It closed in response, its task complete. Horus had achieved something the Emperor had long hidden, communion without resistance. The Emperor had entered the warp to arm himself for a future he would not speak of. Horus entered it to embrace what his father had denied. Both walked the same path. Only one returned willingly. From that moment, the heresy accelerated, not in tactics, not in deployments, but in inevitability. The siege of terror was no longer a strategy. It was a prophecy being fulfilled. The gods had given their son power. Now they demanded his throne. Molech burned behind them. House Divine was no longer a house. It was a temple of ruin. The knights that survived bore runes etched by fire and mutation. Their banners flew not in formation, but in frenzy. The gate beneath Lupercalia faded from the records. Again. And far from the battlefield, in places untouched by warp or war, psychers wept in their sleep. Astropaths howled without knowing why. Because something had changed in the warp's song. A new verse had begun. The reclamation of Molech was never a liberation. It was desecration in stages, measured not in military objectives, but in unmaking. The world had once been a jewel of compliance, its cities restructured under imperial design, its houses rededicated to secular strength. Now it stood as a beacon to the damned, its foundations buckling beneath the weight of divine corruption. When Horus emerged from the gate, the siege began in earnest, not against the Imperium, but against the nature of Molech itself. The cities fell with grotesque precision. Lupercalia, once the crown of compliance, now pulsed with warp saturation. Its skyline was rewritten by fire. Arched spires turned inward like ribs around a bleeding heart. Temples erupted from civic centres, built of bone and screaming metal. The Knights of House Divine led the assaults, but they were no longer knights. They were saints of ruin. Cyprian Divine, once seneschal, now called himself the Hellblade. His night suit had become a demon engine, its ceramite chassis warped into a new physiology. The Reaper chainsword he once wielded had mutated into a serpent tongue of obsidian vertebrae, alive and venomous. His voice, broadcast across all frequencies, became a litany of blood-soaked praise to the coiled god reborn. The Death Guard, under Mortarian's command, advanced in slow, rotting waves. The very air wilted before them. Spore clouds blackened the horizon, and entire regiments of loyalist defenders were reduced to twitching mulch. No retreat was possible. The warp had folded Molech's geography into itself. Escape routes vanished in labyrinthine distortion. Every pass, every river, every canyon became a trap. The defenders, brave and doomed, fought as relics of an old order. Mechanicum battalions unleashed automata forged in the forge vaults of Larsa. Imperial army regiments held choke points for days, their discipline holding even as the stars above changed color. A small contingent of Raven Guard strike teams operated within the ruins, striking and vanishing like shadows trying to hold back the tide. But it was the night houses, those few who had not fallen, that bore the worst. House Donar, faithful since the days of the Great Crusade, stood alone in the southern hemisphere. Their High King, Balmon Donar, refused surrender even as his household shrank with each hour. The Donari knights fought in silence, their vox channels darkened in mourning. They engaged House Divine's traitor knights in brutal single combat across molten plains and shattered keeps. Duels that once honored the code chivalric became cataclysms of blood and madness. One such battle raged for hours between Balmorn Donar and Raven Divine, first knight of the fallen house. Both rode ancient suits that had once shared lineage protocols. Their thrones screamed as they clashed, and the spirits within remembered each other. The duel ended with both knights collapsed in ruin, their pilots fused to the interface, muttering names no longer their own. In orbit, the remains of Molech's battle fleet fought a losing war. Lord Admiral Brithon Semper ordered suicidal ramming maneuvers against traitor cruisers. His flagship, the Iron Dirge, vanished in a warp vortex moments before it could impact the enemy flagship. No debris was found. In the final days, Lupicalia's ruins emitted a psychic beacon. Not constructed, grown. It radiated across the system, attracting warp entities like carrion drawsflies. The Coil had become a horn of summoning. Only 100 souls escaped Molech. They fled in cloaked transports, guided by desperate astropaths, whose minds burned out one by one as they transmitted warnings to Terra. They brought with them no hope, only witness. And deep below the ruins, beneath sacrificial altars and reeking spires, the gate pulsed again. Not open, not closed. Watching. Molech had fallen. Not to fire, but to memory restored. Long after the last vox fell silent and the last imperial beacon sputtered into blackness, one presence remained constant within the ruined bones of Molech. She had no command rank, no armor to bear, no army to call. Her name was forgotten in imperial records, but the gate remembered her. Alivia Sureka had stood watch since the Emperor's first descent. The purpose of her vigil was never spoken. It did not need to be. She had not sworn an oath in the halls of the Sigillite. She had not been trained in the Skolum, nor initiated into the custodian vaults. She simply obeyed, because he had asked it. And that alone bound her more surely than any gene script or psychic geas. She had seen Molech change across the centuries. She walked among the loyal and the damned, unseen, cloaked not in invisibility, but in disregard. No one questioned the quiet woman tending the wounded, or the old hand restoring data feeds in half-lit sacristan shrines. Her presence was always peripheral, but wherever the gate was spoken of, even in whispers, she would appear, and silence would return. When the War Master came, she did not flee. While titans fell, and night thrones screamed in psychic agony, she moved through the chaos like a shadow crossing old stone. She descended into the depths beneath Lupercalia, back into the coiled sanctum, and knelt beside the gate, not in prayer, but in readiness. She felt it the moment Horus crossed the threshold. The breath of the warp curled inward, as though inhaling a storm. The air shimmered with a taste like scorched lilies and metal. Her heart slowed, then resumed its rhythm, measured against a tide she could not see. She did not resist. She bore witness. And when he returned, transformed, crowned with silence, she did not rise. She did not speak. In that moment, Horus saw her. No guards stood between them. No wards barred her presence. And yet he paused. Perhaps he remembered her. Perhaps he did not. Perhaps he saw only a mortal, irrelevant and unarmed. Or perhaps the divinity swelling in his veins recoiled from the simplicity of her presence, unaltered, unafraid, untouched by ambition. He walked past her. She did not follow. In the aftermath, when Molech burned and the Coil screamed beneath its stone, Sureka remained. She tended the gate not as one who guards a treasure, but as one who maintains a tomb. She did not pray. She did not record. She endured. The warp touched her in ways no inquisitor would ever understand. Her genes were unmarked, her mind seemingly ordinary. But she knew things, reflections of what passed beyond the veil. In her dreams, she spoke to the Emperor, or to what remained of his intent. Whether these were true communions, or only echoes of her own resolve, none could say. But her steps never wavered. During the scouring, when Imperial forces finally reclaimed Molech from the ruin of chaos, the gate was once again sealed, not by force, but by ignorance. The loyalists who swept through the remnants of Lupercalia found no trace of the original sanctum. The terrain had shifted. The vault had closed. Only fragments of ritual stone, burned and fused to bedrock, hinted at what had once been. They did not find her. Some say she died long before the heresy's end. Others believe she still walks the ash-choked plains, appearing